And joining us on the phone right now, great to have him back with us. Been with us several times before. Always great to welcome John Feinstein, who has a brand new book out called One-on-One, Behind the Scenes with the Greats in the Game, kind of recounting some of his favorite interviews and stories over the years. John joined us by telephone today. How are you, John?
Good, Doug. How are you?
Good to talk to you again. And as we just said before we went on, about a year ago we talked to you when the Army-Navy book came out. So you're very prolific. You're continuing your one book a year or more.
Well, I that's sort of in the way it's averaged out. It's certainly not been because of any plan. And obviously with adding these kids' mysteries to what I do, since the research for them has pretty much been what I already done because of the places I've been and the people known, that's probably picked up the pace. But this book is really different than any other that I've done because it's sort of key to the 25th anniversary of the publication. My first book, Season on the Brink, which is why I'm in Indiana as I'm speaking right now. And it's really kind of a professional memoir. Went back to a lot of people I had dealt with in past books. Talked to some of the famous people I've dealt with, like Mike Krzyzewski, and of course Bob Knight is the first 6 chapters of the book because he had a big effect on my life, and wrote about people like Dean Smith and Jim Valvano and John McEnroe and Ron Wendell and Joe Torre and Bobby Cox and on down the line, but also about a lot of the people I've met who aren't so famous but who affected, touched me, fascinated me in different ways. So it was a walk down memory lane, and also gave me a chance to tell a lot of personal stories about these people and my interactions that I haven't had the chance to tell before.
Yeah, I had a chance to read through it over the weekend, John, and you do talk about a lot of things. Some of the stories I don't even know about yourself, John. I didn't know I knew you were from New York, but I didn't know your dad was in the arts. That was kind of interesting to find out about you. That was, I guess, I don't think you've ever put that in a book before, have you?
No, I really haven't. I haven't talked much at all about myself in past books. I've always kind of believed I'd get the most readers want to know about the people I'm writing about and not about me. But this book is a little different, as I said, and it is about my relationships with a number of people. And in writing about those people, I also got a chance to tell a few stories that involved my mom and my dad, both of whom were in the performing arts. And people have often said to me, how could your dad have run the Kennedy Center and the Washington Opera and been involved with some of the artists that he was involved in through the years, like Arthur Rubinstein and Isaac Stern and Rudolph Nureyev and Margot Fonteyn and on down the list. And I said, I guess the thing that my dad passed on to me wasn't necessarily a passion for the arts, although I enjoy the arts tremendously, and I'm glad he did pass that on to me. But he passed his passion to me because my dad was very passionate about his work and loved it. And I think it's fair to say I've been very passionate about my work and have loved it too, just in a different genre.
Yeah, I like the story you tell. You're home watching. I think I was probably listening to it on the radio too. That when the Rangers were playing the Blackhawks and they lost that tough game, and you were upset about it, as most Ranger fans like myself probably were. And then I think your dad comes in your room and invites you out to the living room, and there's some actor, I guess, that you saw, wasn't it?
Well, there are actually there are two different stories. Actually,
did I combine them?
Where the Rangers lost the playoff game to the Blackhawks, 3-2 in overtime. Not that I remember it or anything, 40 years later. But my parents were throwing a party for Marian Anderson.
Right, that's it. Yeah, right.
And when I started throwing things around the room and screaming profanities at the television set, my dad came and said, "What in the world are you doing?" And I said, "Bobby Hull just scored to beat the Rangers." And he said, "Would you keep it down? Miss Anderson is trying to sing." And so we had the other story, though, that you're referencing is the first time I saw Hamlet. And I was blown away by it, and by a guy named Richard Pascoe, who played Hamlet, who was with the old Vic at the time. And because my parents were in the world they were in, I went home, I went to sleep, and my dad woke me up sometime after midnight and said, "What did you think of the Hamlet?" And I said, "Oh, Dad, it was the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. The guy who played Hamlet was unbelievable." And my father said, "Well, he's in the living room. Would you like to come in and meet him?" Because my parents had gone out to dinner with Richard Pascoe and his wife, who had played Ophelia that night. So I came out in my pajamas, and, I was 11, 12 years old, and was introduced to Richard Pascoe. And, of course, what I wanted to know was, how did he make his arm bleed when he gets stabbed in the final scene by Laertes? And he explained to me he had the toothpaste in his left hand, and when he's quote-unquote stabbed in the right arm, he just reaches the left hand and smears the toothpaste across his white shirt, and it looks like he's spurting blood. So I thought that was one of the coolest things I'd ever heard.
Well, I just kind of got a kick out of it. I grew up Long Island, but had the appreciation growing, near Broadway, got to see a lot of shows, and that aspect of living in New York. I think it kind of combines both. I mean, I've always enjoyed the sports aspect, but the great performances. I think that's what you've kind of written about in your whole career. The great performances, whether it's on stage or on the athletic field. I think that's what people want to read about, and I guess that's what drew you to sports, right?
Yeah, I think that it's fascinating to be around people who are geniuses at what they do, regardless of what it is. Whether you're talking about Steve Jobs, who was obviously a genius at what he did, or if you're talking about great performers on the stage or in the theater, or if you're talking about great performers in sports. And some of them are more interesting than others. I mean, there are many people who are geniuses at sports who have nothing to say of interest. I've met many of them. Yeah. But I've also been lucky to meet and deal with a lot of people who are brilliant at what they do and are also fascinating to talk to and to try to get an understanding of what makes their minds work was always great fun for me. John McEnroe was the guy I spent a lot of time with through the years, and John is sort of a tormented genius. He's very bright, and one of the things that always fascinated me about John, when Arthur Ashe was dying of AIDS, and he was somebody I was very close to, and Arthur, of course, was the leader in tennis and maybe in sports in terms of taking on important issues, and I said, Arthur was very upfront about knowing that he was going to die. And I said, when you're gone, is there anybody in tennis who can take your place? And he looked at me and said, yeah, it's John McEnroe. He's the guy who has the sensitivity and the smarts. And John is gone. He's not like there. Nobody is, and never will be, I think. But John runs a clinic for underprivileged kids in New York on Randall's Island and does a lot of work like that and has tried to get more minorities involved in tennis. And Arthur got it, that John was the guy, and I always found that interesting because most people wouldn't think that of McEnroe.
Yeah, aside from that terrible talk show he tried, I think he is the best probably tennis analyst now next to the great Bud Collins. I know you talk about Bud in the book as well, but I think he kind of carried that mantle of being probably the best tennis analyst out there on TV.
Well, Bud invented tennis announcing and worked at Boston Globe all those years. I mean, he was the first one to do it when the PBS station in Boston first started televising tennis and then carried it to the networks. And I think John and Mary Carrillo have both picked up the mantle for Bud very well. They're very different personalities. John is kind of a born analyst. Mary's a born reporter. Mm-hmm. Mary and I are very good friends. And, of course, in the book I kind of recount the real reason she left ESPN, which is far different than the reasons ESPN gave for her departure, because it was not the fable they told. It's an entirely different story.
Yeah, I didn't even realize till I read, in the book you talked about it, why she left. That was interesting to get into some of that backstory. I know ESPN has some different ideas of what is good journalism or not, but I didn't know that was what went on with her.
Yeah, Mary just got very frustrated with the cheerleading aspect of ESPN's coverage of tennis, and when the incident happened with Serena Williams a couple years ago at the Open, she felt they were glossing it over the next year because they were trying to get Serena on their air. I mean, there are politics involved in these things, and when she kind of confronted her bosses about it, and there have been other mini blow-ups over things like this, they just weren't honest with her about it, and then Mary just said enough and quit literally in the middle of the U.S. Open, which very few top flight announcers in any sport have ever done. But she just walked away and said, I've got plenty to do with the work I do for HBO and NBC and CBS, and just said no mas. And it took a lot of guts. But very few people walk away from ESPN. They're very powerful. Mary did it, and I'm sure it's ESPN's loss. It's not Mary's loss. Put it that.
Broadcast executives not telling the truth, John. That is very rare.
Film at 11, right? Yeah.
It doesn't make you feel good, but it makes you feel like, well, you're not alone. Everybody's dealt with it. I've dealt with it on more of a local level, but I mean, you've dealt with it. Everybody up to the top level. Regis Philbin just dealt with it with his show, so it's amazing, isn't it?
It becomes less amazing the more often you see it. I think is the best way to put it. put it. And it's sad when it happens, and I've dealt with it too through the years, particularly with ESPN, ironically enough. But I'm very glad that Mary was in a position where she could say thanks, but no thanks to them.
Yeah. Got to ask you just a couple of things on the current level. I read your column. It was in the Washington Post, of course, about the championship selection yesterday. I know you had some comments about that. I think everybody has, just listening to talk radio right now. I guess they got it wrong again, huh?
Well, if they want to get it wrong, Doug, I mean, they're not trying to get it right. They just want to make every dollar they can possibly get. Virginia Tech deserves to be in a bowl championship series game as much as I deserve to be in next year's Masters.
Yeah.
They didn't beat anybody. They got crushed in their conference championship game. Boise State is clearly more deserving. Baylor is clearly more deserving. But it has nothing to do with who's most deserving. It has to do with who will spend the most money, buy the most tickets, send the most fans to the city where the game's being played. I don't think Michigan belongs in a Sugar Bowl either. I think it should have been Baylor or Boise State, Baylor versus Boise State in that game, to be honest. But the Virginia Tech thing is just outrageous, and it shows the arrogance of the BCS people that they can say, look, we don't care what you think. We're going to do what we want. We're going to do what's best for us to make the most money. And fairness has nothing to do with this. Competitiveness has nothing to do with this. We all know that anyway. That's why there's no championship tournament as there should be. And, again, Alabama getting into the championship game, I don't think that's necessarily wrong, but they did get a chance to beat LSU. Oklahoma State didn't, and Oklahoma State's one loss came 24 hours after a horrible tragedy in which the women's basketball coach and assistant were killed in a plane crash. And, you know, if I was going to cut anybody slack one way or the other, it would have been Oklahoma State. But that's not the way this business works. And there's no reason for there to be an argument, because if you have an 8-team tournament, Oklahoma State's just third seed and Stanford's the fourth seed, and so on down the line.
Yeah. Well, I'm very excited about the Beeville Brady's Bowl in St. Pete, John. I'll be there covering that, FIU and Marshall.
Well, I love the idea of the bowl game in San Francisco that involves a 6-6 team and a 6-7 team.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that's really a reward for a great season when you have a bowl game and the two teams' combined record is under 500.
Is that the Poinsettia Bowl?
No, that's the, if I forget these corporate names, I think it's the Kraft Fight Hunger Bowl.
Oh, okay. They changed it. I know there was a Poinsettia Bowl.
TCU.
Okay, yeah.
Which is a very good team, and they should have probably been in a BCS Bowl, too.
Whatever happened to the Astro Blue Bonnet Bowl? Remember that one?
Yeah, I do.
And the Astrodome, I remember that one.
Yeah, and I actually remember the Blue Bonnet Bowl before it was played in the Astrodome, but it's now taken on, it's sort of the Texas Bowl, which is played in Houston, and it's kind of the Blue Bonnet Bowl was the ancestor to the Texas Bowl, which is now played in Reliance Stadium.
Right, yeah, some crazy bowls over the years. Just had to ask you about Tiger Woods winning yesterday. Big deal or not such a big deal?
No. It's a big deal when he wins a major championship.
Yeah.
Come talk to me about it. It was an 18-man exhibition. Certainly, it'll give Tiger some confidence going into next year to have won against any field. I mean, at this point, I think he would have been happy to win a member guest somewhere. So that's good, and he played well in Australia a few weeks ago. Of course, now, what's today, December 5th, he's not going to play any competitive golf again for 6-7 weeks.
Right.
And I just don't know how, if you're supposedly going through a process of trying to improve, you do it if you don't play golf as often. I mean, that's one thing Tiger's refused to admit, that he's not the Tiger Woods he used to be, and that he has to make adjustments in his schedule and in other areas. And again, that's something I have a chapter in the book called Tiger, which is all about how I got to know Tiger and the ups and downs, more downs than ups of our relationship. But I've always found him to be incredibly stubborn, which is part of his greatness, but at other times it really hurts him.
It's all that free time. It gets him in trouble. That's not good.
That's a very good point, too. When he's on the golf course, in between the ropes, he can't get into trouble.
That's right. Well, I know we'll just wrap up with this, but you talk about 25th anniversary. Hard to believe it is, from the publishing of the first book, Season on the Brink, with Bobby Knight. I know you talk in the book about asking him to do another interview there. We won't give it away now, but I guess things haven't changed much with him, his personality, I guess.
No, the thing about Bob that you can always count on is that he's very consistent and will almost always behave exactly as you expect him to. And I did try to explain in the early chapters of the book how our relationship evolved both during Season on the Brink when we were still getting along, and then after Season on the Brink when we had not gotten along so well. We have had the relationship has ebbed and flowed, but for the most part, I sort of got to the point where I said, you know what, Bob is just going to be Bob. And he did me a huge favor by giving me the access he did for Season on the Brink. I couldn't have written the book the way I did without it. It wouldn't have been the success it was without the access. So I remember something John Thompson, who's another guy I've had my battles with, once said, you can live your life on Earth apart from some people, and if Bob and I live our lives apart, I'm sure we'll both be fine.
I am surprised, though. I mean, you talk in the book about, at least you stood up to him a few times. Why nobody else has popped him one over the years?
Well, he's a big guy, for one thing.
I've never seen him up close. Is he pretty big? Yeah.
Oh, Bob's a big guy. Bob's about 6'5", and probably these days weighs at least 250 pounds.
Oh, okay.
He's 71 years old, so he's not nearly as intimidating as he might have been 25 years ago. But you forget how big some of these coaches are because they're always standing next to their players. Bob's a big guy.
Yeah, I've just seen him on TV, so he's all right. Well, I'm 6'5". I could probably do it, but I won't.
There you go. Go take a shot.
Take a shot. Well, the name of the book is called One-on-One, Behind the Scenes with the Greats in the Game. We're talking with John Feinstein today. John, give out your website. People get a hold of you with the book.
Yeah, it's FeinsteinOnTheBrink.com, and you can link there, obviously, if you want to get the book, and you can get it at BarnesandNoble.com or Amazon.com, and plus bookstores. I would recommend, if you're going to order it online, BarnesandNoble.com, because their delivery is much faster and more efficient than Amazon. But either way, whatever works for people, I hope they'll go out and get it.
Great. It's a fun read, and it reads as if you're just like you and I just talking right now. I think that's a testament of good writing when you can write like you're talking, and I really enjoyed it. So thanks for being with us.
Well, thanks, Doug. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun to do, that's for sure.
Good. We'll talk to you when the next book comes out, or next time you're down here in the St. Pete, Tampa, Sarasota area. Thanks for joining us.
Look forward to it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John.